Unnecessary intro song to totally waste your time. I watched the Rogan interview with Bono, and I went back and forth on it. I want to hate Bono so much, you know. Honestly, I kind of want to hate Rogan too. I don't know. I'm inclined to not like people. You know, I'm impatient with people. I'm impatient when they're full of shit. When they say something that isn't true. When it's not something they actually believe. And this interview is just full of that. It's just absolutely full of neither one of them saying exactly what they want to say. You know, and it occurs to me that wanting to be liked is a tremendous handicap. You know, if you want people to like you, you are going to have to lie and misrepresent yourself. You know, the reason why Bono came on Rogan's show is because he thinks he's smarter and a better human than Rogan. And he thinks he can trick Rogan's audience. He thinks he can trick Rogan into a position, and by extension, trick his entire audience into a position, into taking his position. That's the crux of it, right? And that would be fine if he would just say it, you know? But saying it means that people will get upset, you know? Saying it means that Rogan might get upset. Rogan might laugh. So no, what does he do? He just misrepresents his position the whole time. And Rogan does kind of too. I mean, it's a territory where I just kind of like to think, where do you cut slack for people? You know, I believe in cutting slack, and I believe in trying to spot somebody's best intentions, and it's good to be fair with people, and it's good to be patient with people. But to me, that should all follow having disclosed the actual truth. You know, say what you really mean. You know, hi, thanks for having me on your show. I think you're wrong about a bunch of things. Let's get in it. Let's get into it. You know, not trying to twist language and say, you're right about this. Let me butter you up. I think you're really good. You're a great listener, Joe. You're a fantastic listener. Buttering up. I'm just a stupid idiot. Let me feign some humility and tell you endless stories about how charming and great I am by telling you all these times where people treated me well and I pretended to be a humble little guy. You know, it's just like, Bono, no. Stop pretending that. You know, just don't do it. You know, it only exacerbates the disconnect that you have with people. You know, he came on Joe Rogan's show because he saw an opportunity. He knew that Joe Rogan was a fan, right? I'm not buying this idea that he went in unprepared. Like, there's a segment in the show where Rogan brings up Bono's appearance on Jimmy Fallon singing No Ordinary Love and how moving it was and how everything, and they showed the clip, and I agree, you know. I met Bono years ago when a friend's band was opening up for their band right after 9/11, and quite frankly, the opening for that show when they played in Oakland was so powerful. Bono and U2 know how to preach. And let's not mix words. If you're a singer, if you're an artist and you're performing, when you get on stage, you are a preacher. Okay? So anybody that acts like they're an atheist or whatever, or I don't like preachy people, well, guess what? If you're singing songs, you are a preacher. and you're using every tool of manipulation, because that's what art, that's what music is. It's a magic, very powerful medium to convince people to do things, to manipulate their emotions. That's exactly what you're doing. You know, when you're sitting down at a piano by yourself and crying and lamenting, maybe not. But the second you go out and perform for somebody else, you are using basically black magic to try to manipulate their emotions for whatever reason. And so the question isn't about whether or not you're doing that, because you are. It's why are you doing that, and to what ends? You know, are you motivating them to chop their dicks off? Are you motivating them to pray? Are you motivating them to be humble? Are you motivating them to have confidence and courage? What are you motivating them to do? You're trying to motivate them to do something, you know? And Bono's fantastic at that. He's very good. He's got the chops, you know. Literally, tears running down my face watching him. They came out, their opening number, I can't remember the name of the song, but they started playing with the house lights on. The house lights were on. No stage lights were on. Nothing. They came out and did their first song with that, and I could not believe how weirdly powerful it was, because it broke the fourth wall. It was no longer performer. It was like, yes, they were on stage, but that's the only thing. The lighting was exactly the same. You could see every person, and it was really kind of a surreal experience, but very powerful. Anyway, so Bono's very well aware of his talent to do this, and he's aware that Joe Rogan is a fan. No, he wouldn't have decided to go on Rogan if he thought Rogan hated him, but anyway, so the point I was trying to say when I say I met him, I did meet him. There was a possibility that he and the band were going to come over to my house, as was typical back in those days with my friend bands. They'd all come back to my house for an after party or whatever. And but I choked and I said, let's just stay here at the hotel, because I really didn't want to have them over, because I thought, oh shit, do I need limos and security outside of my house? No, I don't. But so I'm familiar with his little back scene, and his bodyguard, John Sampson, ended up being the bodyguard for this friend of mine in their band. So his bodyguard came to my house, and he's like, oh man, you blew it when you didn't invite Bono over, because he would have loved this place. You guys would have got along great. And his bodyguard, anyway, so I know the backstory about this thing. Not intimately. I went on tour I got to know his bodyguard very well, because when I was on tour with this band, he and I would just hang out and shoot the shit. And he told me lots of things about Bono. He said, the first thing is that Bono himself baptized John Sampson in Ireland. Like, I can't remember if it was in a river or in the ocean. I can't remember, but something like that. And he talked about it. So John told me straight to my face that Bono's the real deal. And I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that Bono really has good intentions. For the most part, the music that he makes is uplifting. It's motivational. And I don't see it as bad. And so I think he really does have good motives, and you can see that during this interview. Okay, let me just get into it. What I think he has is savior complex. And I'm familiar with that, because I believe I suffer from savior complex to a much lesser degree and without the access. But the motivation is still there, And I think Rogan even has a little tiny twinge of it too. And literally most famous people, or at least most artists who are using music to talk about love and freedom and, all the typical things that typically inspire people and give them goosebumps. I think most of them have good motives, and they understand the power of the medium, of the singing, of the chords, of the rhythms, of the lighting, of everything. So they understand that. But what happens is that savior complex, if it starts working, it's kind of like it feeds upon itself and grows, you know? And if you watch this interview thinking this guy has savior complex, it looks like a different thing, you know? And this is the weird question that I keep struggling with about this is like, at what point is it wrong for you to be charming and patient and seemingly fair and manipulative, you know? If you're doing it thinking, you're really going to make a change, you know? I think that Bono really probably does think that cutting USAID is harming lots of people, right? Because, look, when Bono goes somewhere, Bono does not experience life. No matter how much he tries to tell stories in this interview with Rogan, or no matter how much those two try to exchange ideas, it's been years since either one of them experienced life as a normal person. They don't experience life as normal. If you don't believe me, try to have a famous friend. Try to go somewhere with your famous friend. Okay? They're not experiencing life the way you are. They are surrounded by people that are trying to make a cocoon around them, trying to say yes. They're surrounded by yes men. If they have anybody in their sphere that's not a yes man, it's by their choice only. So there's kind of a yes man quality there too. You know, there's just not a lot of real conflict. They can weed that all out, and they don't even have to. When Bono steps off a plane somewhere, somebody's waiting for him. His bodyguard's there, John Sampson. He's got a whole crew, you know. So he doesn't get to see. He doesn't, and he's not particularly intelligent. When you have the gift of music or the gift of gab, that doesn't increase all of your. It doesn't heighten your bullshit detector. You know what I mean? And all these things surrounding you. To give you a different spin on the globe. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is I don't think he's necessarily in on this scam. You know, I see these memes where, look, Bono's in a hot tub with two ladies. He went to Epstein Island. It's just like, look, anybody that was in the philanthropy business, those were the people that were targeted by Epstein. He had a bunch of money. They're constantly, these guys with savior complex, I think, okay, I got to do something good with my time. This rock and roll thing is a little bit, the image is not that great. I want to turn it into something positive. And along come all these opportunities with all these charities, all these NGOs coming and saying, hey, I want you to help me with this. And if you're a halfway decent person, you say, okay, I want to be part of that. Sure, I don't want to just hoard all my money for myself. You know, and if I can use my voice, you hear them saying it all the time, if I can use my voice to help this. And by the way, most of these charities have a good pitch. You know, help starving children, help end AIDS. Most of them are built to seize upon your good nature, you know? And they do that with Bono too. Like I said, he's not unusually bright or smarter or more savvy than everybody else. He's just incredibly good at what he does, which is singing and manipulating people's hearts, you know? But that doesn't make him, immune to being scammed. Like when he's talking in this interview with Joe Rogan, he's talking about how 300,000 people have already died, because of these cuts. Totally bullshit figure. Just somebody pulled it out of their ass. They wrote it down. And they manipulated Bono with it. And Bono probably believes it to one degree or another. In other words, he isn't directly lying. Let me back up about savior complex, and why it's such a complicated thing to have, especially if you have savior complex and you become famous, it only exacerbates it. Why shouldn't Bono believe that he is anointed by God? Why shouldn't he? What reason does Bono have, even in his most rational moments, sitting, in his house alone, in a dark room, just pondering his own life? What evidence is there in his life that says, Bono, you aren't a savior? You don't have power. There isn't any. But there's tons of evidence that he is a savior, right? He can pick up a phone and fill a stadium with 10,000 people in a day. He can pick up a phone and get anybody to answer it. He can get on his jet. People welcome him and thank him wherever he goes. They roll out the red carpet, literally. He's got a bodyguard that he baptizes that loves him. And by the way, I think it's kind of interesting that he's never had a divorce. He got married as a young guy, and he's still married to the woman. So the idea that Bono's just going to self-correct and go and find some humility and think, I'm not a savior, let me rethink some things. It's kind of low because the pressure isn't there for that. The mechanism that he's in is constantly rewarding this cycle that he's in, So the good intentions are there, I think. Even when he's not being honest with Joe. And he's not. He's not being honest with Joe. He's not coming in and saying, look, I think I'm better than you. I think I'm here to change your mind. I have special information that Trump is an evil man, and I want you to... He's not saying this directly. No, he's buttering Joe up. I would respect him more if he was just upfront. I respect most people more. And I get it. There's a lot of pressure to, I don't know, be overly patient with people and try to be diplomatic. But I don't like that, I never have. Like, I've engaged in it because sometimes you're surrounded by a bunch of people and you just want the evening to go well and you don't want to really have a fight. So you'll maybe nod and you'll say this phrase, yeah, but, which is totally an oxymoron. Yeah, but. Okay, not yeah. There's no yeah. You're not really agreeing because you put the but after. You're not really agreeing. How about just get straight to the part where you disagree? Be honest about it. Don't try to pretend like we agree. It's tempting to do that because it's tempting to focus on things where you do agree. They call it building a yes ladder. And I find it to be kind of deceptive. It's why I called myself an atheist back in the day, even though I typically didn't really qualify as one. I wanted to be upfront. If you give people the ammo to not like you, I think you're doing a better service. You know, get this shit out up front. Don't surprise people. Don't trick them into liking you. First of all, I think it's evil. I've done it. But usually I've done it with people that were presented a threat to me to begin with. In other words, they didn't like me. They were talking shit about me. And then with charm or whatever and patience and a few little social tricks, I tricked them into becoming my bodyguards, essentially. You know, turning a foe into a fan can be done with some certain engagement tactics, looking them in the eye, asking them some questions about themselves, you know. Even, you don't even have to pretend to be interested, but just being interested in them. If you're interested in somebody, they change, you know. And so you don't even necessarily need to misrepresent yourself. Like, I'm interested in my enemies and what makes them tick, you know. So you can look at them in the eyes and ask them why they're like that and pummel them with questions, and slowly they'll come around. There's one way to do that that's well-intentioned, and there's another way to do that that's not well-intentioned. In other words, if you do that, if you turn a foe into a fan, and then you walk away, and under your breath you're saying, fuck that guy. Well, you know, maybe they deserved it, whatever. I'm not here to judge, but it's not straightforward, right? Because you're not letting them hate you. Maybe you deserve to be hated, you know? Maybe your ideas aren't great. Maybe the ideas, at the very least, deserve the controversy or the heated debate about them. Anyway, I've seen it over and over again, right? I saw it with Prince, another guy that I met. I saw it with Lenny Kravitz, another guy I met. I mean, and at Lenny Kravitz's show, you know, my business partner promoted the show. Or wait, maybe not actually. I think I might have just been there as a guest of the opening band. But anyway, this was in a Bravenel Hall in Salt Lake City. And at a certain point, Lenny Kravitz is singing what's that song? There's one, it's kind of like a One Love type song. You know, every one of these bands has one of these songs, you know, where they're trying to heal the world through this one song, and he's got it, and it's working pretty well. But he goes up, and again, the house lights come on, and he's going up through the balcony and just kind of singing with the fans. And this savior complex is overwhelming. You can see that he is believing every moment of his savior complex in a way that maybe even the crowd wasn't, you know, but he's up there. Look, we're going to change the world right now. We're doing it. We're healing, that kind of thing. And again, what evidence does he have that he is not that? The evidence is that there are 5,000 people in a room all looking at him and singing words that he wrote. You know? Harmonizing and weeping and sweaty and, you know, the evidence is there for these people to seriously wonder whether or not they are saviors. And look, the way I see it is, sure, they are, but so are you. You know, we all have the ability to push the world into a better direction, right? That's kind of the premise of my little church that I started. I don't know what made me. I don't know what made you, but I know we can make things too. Whatever made me and you made us to make things too. So make is what we do. And it goes, I made this song for you, but the question isn't whether or not you will be creating. You are part of the ongoing process of the creation of the universe. It wasn't created a long time ago. It's being created right now, literally, always unfolding. You're part of that. Everybody's part of it. And so the question isn't whether or not you will make something. You will. The only question is whether it will be good or whether it will be bad. Are you going to make things better or are you going to make things worse? That's every single person on an individual level. That applies to them. It also applies to rock stars with influence who have all this pressure and evidence that they are anointed. And that, it gets tricky, right? How do you avoid savior complex if thousands of people treat you like a god? How? How do you do it? It's one of the most disgusting aspects of fame that is one of the reasons why I cut all that stuff off years ago, is because I found it to be very off-putting. Not necessarily the figures, not necessarily Bono, not Lenny, not, Prince. It's not, they aren't the problem, really. You can kind of cut them slack. It's the people around them. It's how they get surrounded by people who want to just own them and somehow manipulate and use that power for their needs. And let's not get into that too much, but because I want to stay focused on this conversation between Bono and Rogan, which is worth watching. Because I sensed that Bono was trying. You can see it. You can see that Bono is trying to be fair and friendly with Rogan and trying to appeal to him. I kept wondering how much of this is genuine and how much of it is bullshit manipulation. And I was going back and forth. And it's a tough call. I'm willing to make tough calls and be wrong about them. But I think the nuance here is that even if you're well-intentioned, if you aren't being upfront with your disagreements, I think it's fair to say you're being unfairly manipulative. Do you know what I mean? And again, it comes back to give people the chance to hate you. Allow them the chance to not like you. Because if you're constantly switching up your game and switching up your language in order to appeal to somebody, to make them like you, you're not being honest. That's a selfish behavior. To try to gain favor with a human is a selfish endeavor. Whereas giving it to them straight, for me, this is me. I'm going to project onto Bono right now what I was seeing. I see Bono coming into a room with Joe, who has all the Joe-ness about him, and the reason why people like him is because he's a populist type figure. Joe doesn't say things the way a well-honed, crafted person says things. He just kind of reacts, and he has elements of that. Don't get me wrong. I put Joe kind of in some ways. He's doing the same thing. He's still trying to get liberals to like him. He misrepresents. How long did he pretend not to like Trump? And it seemed pretend to me. Might not be. Might be legit. How long? He's still pretending to be a liberal, a homeless liberal. I don't think he is. I think he's much more conservative underneath all that stuff, and he seems to be misrepresenting himself to what? Gain favor in a selfish kind of way, to make sure that his podcast stays popular, to make sure that he still gets paid by Spotify or whatever, or still has access to Bono, or the Black Keys. I think a lot of his playing seems to be self-serving and not honest. He's not giving people the clear opportunity to hate him. And I know this sounds weird, but I don't think you're really good person if you can't allow somebody to really not like you. If you're not willing to be despised for telling it like it is, for shooting straight, well, you're engaged in self-serving behavior, you know? But I think that wraps into savior complex, you know? Because if you have savior complex, there's this motivation for doing that. You know, there's a motivation for charming, for misrepresenting. Like, again, I'm going to sound redundant, but watch the interview and watch how many times in an artificial way Bono feigns interest in Joe Rogan and his audience, and feigns patience, and feigns understanding. I don't buy that he thinks that Joe Rogan's audience are just as moral and just as intelligent and bohemian as he is. I don't buy it. I think he looks down on them. I think in his private moments, he thinks that Joe Rogan's listeners, I mean, because you see the way that he talks about Trump, you know, he doesn't let it out completely, but he's trying to pull Rogan into a sphere where Trump is an evil person relishing, I think these are something he even said, relishing in the misfortune of others. You know, that's the way he kind of puts it, where cutting this US aid money, you know, is taking glee in the suffering of others. And that's obviously not, I don't see any evidence of that from Trump. I see the obvious opposite. In fact, I think Trump also has a version of savior complex, but he more matches what I'm saying. He gives people the opportunity to hate him. And that, to me, is a virtue. That's valiant. He says it, well, he'll engage in it a little bit. Like, he's your biggest fan. He'll give you the best introduction in the world, even if he doesn't know you. He'll say all your best qualifications, you know. Meet John. He's the best. He's literally, you don't find him like him, people like him anymore. You just don't see him until you cross him, and then he'll be like, you're a fat piece of shit. I don't like you. You're a loser. You know? In other words, he gives people the opportunity to see him as the enemy. And again, I see that as a virtue because it's not bullshit. He's not trying to be liked on false terms. And that's what I mean. When you're being honest, the great thing about being honest, and if you're not honest, and a lot of people aren't, most people aren't, is, and it takes practice and it takes some getting used to. And my life, I feel like, is a long series of trying to become more honest. And at every stage, I think I'm one of the most honest people I know, and I tell it like it is. And I'm not talking about not telling little lies to get away with shit. You know, I'm talking about representing myself truthfully, come what may. You know, and I always think, I don't give a fuck what people think. But then as years go by, I look back and I give less fucks. And it makes me realize that I gave more fucks in the past than I do now. And it makes me wonder, like, what fucks am I giving now that I won't give in 10 years? And why can't I just stop giving them now? The problem is you're not aware of the fucks that you're giving. A lot of times this is under the hood. And that's kind of what I'm saying about cutting slack for Bono. Is because it's hard to tell how self-aware a person is. And you kind of have to know that you're doing something to be blamed for doing it. And that's the interesting thing about watching that interview, at least for me, is I was trying to ascertain how much of the Bono show on the Rogan show was, I don't know, what do you call it? Blatantly self-promotional. Anyway, just trying to gauge his self-awareness. It's not easy. It's not easy. I don't read minds, but I certainly did see lots of instances during the interview where I felt like Joe was being more upfront, right? First of all, Joe was listening. He let Bono go on, didn't interrupt him or anything. But as soon as Bono said something against Trump and Elon about cutting U.S. aid, Joe pivoted and was very blunt. He kind of stands as an example of what I'm saying. He said, no, there was a lot of corruption. He conceded. He says, maybe there's some throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think he needed to concede that. And I see that as being one of those elements of trying to throw Bono a bone, for favor. I don't know if Joe really believes it or if he's just taking it for granted because Bono said it. I don't think he believed it. In my position, I would have said, fuck that. No, nuh-uh. Not a single dollar. Okay, and this is the part where, watching the interview, I realized that the savior complex and fame that surrounds these two guys has really disconnected them. Like, neither of these people, not Joe, not Bono, especially not Bono, have any clue what their regular person's life is like. In the past, they might have, when they were young, really young, but not as adults. Since these guys have been adults, they've been famous. The whole time. The whole time. Their struggles in life were as children. So that doesn't relate with a 40-year-old man who's lost his job or is struggling from paycheck to paycheck. Neither one of these guys know. And so this whole conversation about U.S. aid being cut is insulting when either one of them, for even 5 seconds, tries to moralize on how the U.S. government, who steals money from people, spends that money. If either one of them were connected to it, or if there was a person that was connected to it in the room, you just go, hey, Bono, fuck you. Why are you trying to moralize on what's immoral about how my stolen money is spent? Do you realize that I'm hungry, that I worry about things? Why are you trying to say, oh, but it's only 1% of the budget, it's not a big deal? It's a big deal to me, you motherfucker, when you're taking money from me and you're, even if, let's say that it was completely honest, let's say that every single penny went to help a starving kid in Africa, and nothing was siphoned off 99% of it wasn't stolen and fraudulent. Let's just say it was real. You're spending my money. Quit stealing my money. It's immoral from the beginning. From the very beginning, U.S. aid is immoral from the beginning because the money is stolen from people, most of whom could use it. Doesn't matter how much more the people in Africa are suffering. They've got their own problems. Everybody's got their own problems. If you want to come around and hold out a bucket, I'm happy to contribute. That happens in churches across. People are very, very charitable, but it's not charitable to steal my money. Then you go around on the backs of my stolen money and pretend to be a hero using my stolen money. You're not a hero, Bono. You are not a hero by using your fame and fortune to encourage the ongoing theft of my money by couching it in terms of, oh, you're just heartless if you don't do it. Then spend your own money, fucker. Let me see your bank account right now. I want to see it right now. You zero out your bank account. You make your bank account look like my bank account and swear off your earnings. You take a vow of poverty, Bono, right now. And then we'll talk. We'll talk like two honest people. You know? Joe, you too. Zero it out. Zero it out. If you're not willing to zero it out and take a vow of fucking poverty, you know, if you're not willing to actually live like the rest of us live, then save it. Save your fucking moralizing. You don't get to be a savior on my dime. On my dime. And there wasn't any of that. And the weirdest part is you can see why. Because they've lost contact with it. You've lost it. I have. There's all degrees to this thing. There are degrees to this. You know, I've got it better than some people have got it. You've got it better than some people have got it. I got it better than some of you. You've got it better than me. You know, so there's different levels to this. But how dare anybody just say to the common man whose money has been stolen and he's being trampled on and forgotten about, you know, just the immorality. It's so immoral to steal. Like, I don't care. It's immoral to steal from rich people and give it to poor people. But it's less immoral than stealing from poor people to give it to rich people. And that's what these scams are. That's what Doge has showed. That's what we all know anyway. We didn't need Doge to know this. We all know. I live in San Francisco, the land of nonprofits, where not a penny of the money they raise goes to the claimed recipients, you know? Not a penny. You know, it all goes to line the pockets of the people that run these things. It's a giant scam. And that, to me, is as immoral as anything. It is more immoral than selling dildos. You know what I mean? It is more immoral than selling harmful drugs. You know, because the people that are selling the harmful drugs or whatever, the drug dealers on the street, the hookers, if nothing else, it's an honest exchange. It's a down and dirty, no virtue implied. But to imply virtue, to advertise something as being good and holy when really it's fucking dark and evil, that's bad. Now, I'm not saying that Bono knows of this. My point is saying that he's insulated to a degree that he probably doesn't. And insulated to a degree where he probably will stay in denial of that. Because if he really, you know, takes the red pill and finds out that he has been clapping like a monkey for a lot of these NGOs, for his church even, you know, for the Catholic Church, you know, for Mother Teresa, one of the most vile creatures to ever walk the earth, you know, in an organization that set it up that way. It's like, Mother Teresa, hey, go take a bunch of photo ops with starving children so we can raise money. Don't help them. We have billions of dollars. We could very easily lift these children out of the poverty, but we need them to be sick and dying. Look, don't get me started on Mother Teresa. Just look into it. The things that she said, you know, she was a had a suffering fetish on the level. Like suffering is how we get closer to God. In other words, I'm not going to help these kids to not suffer because it's their suffering that makes them awesome. That's some sick and twisted shit, you know? Anyway, but Bono's got that. He's pimping for all these organizations. Does he know it? Or has he been insulated to a degree where his denial isn't even really denial? You know, I don't know. Saying I'm in denial implies that I know what I'm in denial of. You know? And sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes you just legitimately think you're doing a good job. And it's possible that Bono, for all the reasons I've stated before, because of the insulation and because of all the evidence, the fawning people, the red carpets, the jet airplanes, the answered phone calls. I can't just call up Joe Rogan and say, hey, let me be on your show. I mean, I can, but guess what? The phone call is not going to get answered. And I'm not going on Joe Rogan's show unless I decide to pull out the stops and do all the things a person needs to do to gain public favor, a lot of which is engage in dishonest bullshit. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to do that. I'm not willing to do it. Therefore, I don't have access. But he does. And it's fair to consider that to be evidence that he's a special creature. You know, I'm a special little princess. I can prove it. Prince could prove it. Prince could pick up the phone on Wednesday and play to a packed stadium on Thursday night if he wanted to. It's pretty powerful. Hard to deny that, right? Anyway, we've gone on long enough. Savior complex is it's a complicated topic because you do want to use your power and your energy, if you have it, to do good things, right? But humility is good too. And how the fuck do you find humility when everything around you is telling you you're the shit? You're the shit. You say it, we'll do it. Bono, your wish is my command. That's some fucked up shit right there. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for listening. Unnecessary outro song to totally